Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. My guest today is Rachel Moore. Prior to Rachel's career as a marriage and family therapist, Rachel earned a bachelor's degree in creative writing and enjoyed a 14-year career as a newspaper copy editor, winning a Pulitzer Prize in 2006, along with the staff of the San Diego Union-Tribune. She left newspapers in 2010 to study her master's in marriage and family therapy. And during that time, she started a creativity coaching business and facilitated workshops based on the book, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Currently, she sees therapy clients in her private practice in San Diego, where her focus is on helping writers, artists, singers, and musicians. Rachel is an active singer. We're going to have her sing on the show today, most likely near the end, and has performed on several stages around San Diego and is a current member of the San Diego Master Chorale. Rachel is also the creative force behind her podcast, Beyond the Artist Block, which explores mental health and creativity, bringing interviews and insights to working with creative people. We're excited to have Rachel with us on the show to lean into her creativity and the art of working with creative clients. Rachel, welcome to our show. So nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Nice to have you here. You know, as we start out today, you made a pretty big shift from being in the newsroom to becoming a marriage and family therapist, an MFT. Talk about that transition. What led to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people will say like, wow, that seems so different. And actually, I know a few of us who've made this transition. And I think about it in a couple of different ways. One is that I've always been interested in stories. So I'm interested in people's stories and learning about them and really connecting with them and connecting with, stories and just learning all kinds of things about people and everything else. So I'm a curious person. So you got to be curious to be a journalist. You got to be curious, to be an effective therapist, I think. And so just generally speaking, that's where I see those two careers coming together. And there are a lot of reasons why I left at the time I did. One is that unfortunately, the newspaper industry was and is, taking a downward spiral. And the job I had before as a copy editor really wasn't the same job. And I also kind of felt like I had done everything I needed to do there and learned everything I wanted to learn. It was a very creative job, but it wasn't really emotionally fulfilling in the way that I thought maybe a career could be. And the more practical reason too was that I had just recently gotten married and my hours at the paper were odd. They were like swing shift, like 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. type of thing. I'd work holidays and work weekends oftentimes. And my husband said, he said, I thought I could handle kind of this long distance relationship in a way, because we didn't really see each other except for on the weekends, and other times. So he said, I thought that would be okay, but it's not really that okay. And
That's
I
hard.
totally understood, yeah. And honestly, once I left those hours, I thought you couldn't pay me to work those hours again. So it was all good. Yeah.
Sometimes when you're in it, it's hard to realize what it's like not to be in it until you're out of it. And you see what it was like. When you were going through your MFT training, you started a creativity coaching business and facilitated workshops around this book, The Artist's Way. And you're talking about your love for stories, your interest and love for connections and your own curiosity. And you're also an artist, as a singer. How does some of that set the stage for working with creative people? Where did that focus in that population develop an interest from?
Well, it's interesting when I graduated from my MFT program and was getting my hours toward internship and was wondering like, yeah, who am I going to work with? Who are the people? I just couldn't figure it out. And sometimes the most obvious answer is right in front of you. And I like the idea too that when you're a therapist and you're looking for your niche is you. Yeah, I really think that's true. Now, that's not to say like we definitely can and should work with people who are different from us, and learn about people who have different interests and experiences in life. And, I realized like, oh, I understand creativity. I understand the importance of art. And frankly, for me, it's one of the big reasons that makes life worth living. And if it's so important for me, it's got to be important for other people too. And I want to be the type of therapist that I would want to go to who would understand why singing is so important to me, right? like why writing and these things have been so pivotal in my life, not just as a hobby. And for some
Right.
people it is hobbies, and that's great too. And for some of us too, it's really, like I said, like a reason to be alive. And that's so
Yeah.
important when it comes to life and therapy and everything else.
So this importance of creativity in our lives, I think it gives life a lot of things. You focus, and we could say that, well, everybody's creative in their own niche, but you
Sure.
found a niche of people that are more along the lines of singers and performers and musicians and writers and artists.
Hmm.
Why that group? I mean, is it
Hmm.
because you had this exposure yourself in your performing arts and just as a singer, or why that group of creatives?
For me, it's just nice to kind of hang out with people that I feel like hang out with, work
Right.
with. We're not friends, but we're working together
Yeah.
with people who are on the same wavelength. And honestly, it just saves a lot of time. It's a lot easier for both of us.
Yeah.
Like if I understand a bit what it's like to live a creative life, for example, or have these ideas, or again understand the importance of what, like, we just save a lot of time, right? And they don't have to
Yeah.
explain it to me. I understand it. I don't have to have them explain to me like what life is like being an engineer, although I have worked with engineers too. So it's just kind of fun in that way, in that
Yeah.
it saves a lot of time, and like I said, it's just kind of fun to be on the same wavelength
Yeah.
and really understand each other in a way that is unique. I think that people who aren't creative in their own lives certainly can work with creative clients and do very effectively. And just for me personally, it's just nice to kind of already have that sort of built into what we're doing. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Sometimes it does. It's kind of nice when, it takes one to know one, or at least that bridge is more easily built and
Yeah.
quickly understood when that similarity is there. As you've worked with them, what have you come to understand and learn about creatives in the world, and particularly the ones you work with? And what are they typically coming into therapy with for you?
It's interesting because the first thing I thought when you said that question was just about how hard it is to be a creative person, at least in this North American culture. I was running a artist way group recently, and I had this thought, and I shared with the group. I said, "Do you think that people have these issues around being an artist like in France?"
Mhm. Good question. Yeah.
Is this
Is this
do
universal?
they, yeah, do they kind of have to get together and normalize being artists and wanting to make a living as an
Right.
artist in the world, and all these things? I'm like, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that this might be kind of unique, at least to our culture and a few other cultures. So that's, something that I notice is that there are a lot of ideas. I think, we might talk about stigmas around art a little later too, but it occurs to me, sometimes when I tell other therapists that I work with artists, occasionally the first question they have is, "Oh, how are they able to pay you?"
Mm.
Which is a
Pretty big
really interesting
stereotype.
question. Yeah, yeah. It's like the stereotype, and that's not to say, like, I do have, a sliding scale. I do, because I like working with all kinds of different people with all kinds of different means. I don't think it, you know, should preclude somebody from seeing me, at least. And yeah, there are a lot of stereotypes. There are a lot of ideas. There's a lot of, like, in our culture, there's a lot of like, oh, well, you must have a lot of time on your hands if you're, spending your time drawing or painting or singing. And it's kind of demeaning, to be honest with
Mhm.
you. And I think that unfortunately, we all kind of share that experience in one way or another. So sometimes people do come to me for, specifically creative blocks, things like that. Other times, a person is an artist and has, other issues in life, like maybe they're working through grief. Maybe they're working through other aspects of their career. And I tend to believe, I don't know what you think, I tend to believe that most everything is related and connected.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
again, to bring up Julia Cameron's words, she says, if you want to work on your art, work on your life,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So if you're having issues around creativity, maybe the issue is like, how am I spending my time?
Right.
And how do I want my life to be?
Yeah, it's really good. You talked about some of the stigmas that artists must bring in when they come to see you. What are some of the stigmas that you find them wrestling with?
It's interesting because the first thing that comes to mind is, a lot of times people will ask me outright, and I'm using this word, because this is the word they use oftentimes, but they'll ask me outright, like, "Am I crazy?"
Yes.
You know? And they
Yeah.
wanna know, like, is it wild for me to want to be pursuing this career in art, for example, is my parents tell me that I should do something more practical or this and that and the other, and yet I don't feel it in my soul. Like, what's wrong with me? Oftentimes that's kind of a stigma too, is that they think that there's something wrong with them
Mhm.
if maybe money isn't necessarily the thing in life that's most important to them, for example. Maybe they have, other interests like beauty and creation and things like that.
I would
And
imagine that some of those
yeah,
early interactions as you're talking about this, just pops to mind is
yeah,
those must be some very wounding interactions over their life. If this is somebody who truly is creative and has the ability to do it, we oftentimes think of creativity as being something, you do, in your free time or it's on the periphery versus maybe something that's so inherently important in the fabric of our lives, but it doesn't get seen that way. We always see it through the dollar bills and are you going to be able to make a
right.
living, the starving artist, cliche, etc. I would imagine some real wounding as someone begins to say, hey, you know what? I think I need to pursue something in the creative fields here and watching the response of others.
Yeah, oftentimes criticism too,
Yeah.
criticism of the work itself can be really hard. And even though I went to a liberal arts school and I studied creative writing, I don't feel like I went to an art school per se because it
Mhm.
was, it was different from that. I learned about a lot of different things. And so I didn't necessarily get the experience of some people who in academia, for example, are just taken apart
Mm.
and they're calling it education, to be treated that way. There is kinda a movement now, more and more people are advocating for schools, for example, to bear in mind the nervous system, to
Mhm.
really learn about polyvagal theory, to understand that we don't have to literally or figuratively kill ourselves in order to make good art or be artists. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's
Mhm.
better for us to be in a healthy state
Yeah.
in order to be creative, yeah.
I would imagine too, when I think of artists in many different ways, whether you're, drawing something or you're listening to something, you're creating something, you're producing something in those creative fields. And I know a fair number of them. And they bring a really nuanced appreciation for hearing, the harmonies and the melodies of
Mhm.
life, the ways that things get shaded in,
Mm.
the things that oftentimes most of us kind of just take for granted. We just kind of see the big picture, or, hey, that was a good song. But
Yeah.
those that are artistic can hear the more nuanced, kind of finer, little lilts in there, or the little, aspects of that shading that really enhance something. It must be really enjoyable as a therapist because this is, you're creative as well, to be
Mhm.
able to listen through that lens for those more
Mhm.
intricate, again, nuanced pieces that maybe sometimes people don't even see in themselves that you get to kind of hold up and say, hey, you know what I'm noticing? And maybe
Mhm.
they get to see it too for the very first time.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of being a therapist, right? Is to be that mirror. And I think you're right. The word that comes up for me around what you're saying is sensitivity, right?
Yes.
Kinda having a heightened or higher
Yes.
sensitivity. And of course, that's a double-edged sword too sometimes because I think as an artist and a creative, that's where we can be harmed when it does come to those wounds and things like that. So it's like the flip side of that. And on the other side, like, yeah, we are able to, yeah, make life richer, I think, for everybody. And that's the beauty of artists and creatives. And yeah, it is fun as a therapist to sort of listen with that really open because to be creative, you have to be open, right?
Yes.
To
Have to be
whatever comes
vulnerable.
up.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and I feel like every time somebody comes in the door or I see them online, I don't know what's gonna happen. It's improv every time, right? I certainly have it is important to have, like, a structure. Like, I do EMDR, I do brain spotting, like, I'm trained in those modalities. It's important to have a structure. Within that structure, let's just see what happens. And it's very exciting. That's why I'm even getting chills talking about it right now, 'cause that's why I never get bored with my job, you know?
It's nice.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Are you preparing for a licensure exam in psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, counseling, or behavioral analysis? AATBS is here to help. We have been supporting behavioral and mental health students to prepare for their licensure exams for more than 45 years, working with over 1 million students to succeed on test day and move on to the next step in their career. With products ranging from comprehensive courses to quiz banks and delivered live online, self-study online, and in print, AATBS has test prep solutions that meet every student's needs and learning styles. Visit us today at aatbs.com. That's aatbs.com and use promo code BHT15 to save 15% off your next purchase.
I like the idea we're talking about the more nuanced, intricate parts of this. When we're working with folks, we recognize that they may not know what they don't know about themselves. And sometimes in therapy, in the mirroring process, particularly if we're looking at a little bit of a kind of a strength-based focus in holding things up, we get to almost introduce them to themselves. They've been living this self as they don't recognize it, but they've been living this. And as we begin to kind of hold themselves up to them, they begin to get some perspective in a new way. And ideally, when you're talking about, hey, you've got this really great ability to be sensitive to and conscious of things that others don't. And boy, what an opportunity to help them both understand that, maybe for the very first time, and appreciate, but then also understand their contribution that makes life so much richer and enhances other people's, lives too, without maybe them even realizing it.
A lot of what comes up in my work is this idea of worthiness.
Yes.
And we talk about that a lot. And I mean, just purely from my human parts, forget being a therapist or whatever, I share with people oftentimes, like, you are worthy just from existing. And I know on the surface that sounds like, okay, yeah, whatever, but I really feel it, like, right. I
Yeah.
love my clients. I mean, I
Yeah.
am honored to meet them, to interact with them, to be trusted by them. I mean, I don't take that for granted. And honestly, to get their perspectives and insights too. I learned, we talk about this a lot as therapists, I think, like, I learn so much from my clients.
Mhm.
And that's not the purpose, it's just a nice side effect.
Yeah. Well, I
I
think
learn
that's
about
a
myself. Yeah.
serendipitous piece of what we get to experience. We get to grow. We get to have our lives enhanced.
Hmm.
We get to understand things that maybe we didn't understand before, but just an appreciation kind of for this human condition
Yeah.
that we're all in, this thing called life. And you mentioned you use a couple of a variety of techniques and approaches. One of them being EMDR, and
Hmm.
one of them is brain spotting. And
Hmm.
I don't believe a lot of people know much about brain spotting. Help us understand, just give us kind of a working definition of that, and then how you implement that into your work and how you decide to bring that into your work and its benefit.
Sure. Yeah. And there's a really great video that I will try to remember to put for the resources for the
Thank
episode
you.
too. It's a really good description of brain spotting, where it came from, what it is. It came out of EMDR, and the short version is that instead of using eye movements the same way we do in EMDR to process through disturbing events, we just find one spot. And the idea is that our brains and our eyes are made up of the same stuff. I don't know the technical definition of this, but this is what I'm told. And there is a connection between our vision and maybe the trauma that's in the deeper parts of our brains. And so through brain spotting, we just use a wand or whatever, visual thing to find a spot where that's stimulated. And then we just they call it getting subcortical. So
Hmm.
we just kind of get behind the prefrontal cortex. People can talk or not talk when they're doing brain spotting. I hardly talk at all as the therapist. I'm just there to facilitate this process. And the brain, we just allow the brain to work through whatever it needs to work through in the way it needs to do it.
What are you
So,
doing in that moment as the brain is activated in that spot where the,
uh-huh.
let's say, trauma is held at the
Yeah.
subcortical level? What are you
Hmm.
doing in that moment while the brain is actively healing as a therapist?
As a therapist,
What are you doing?
oh, I'm talk about the paying attention. I'm so focused on what's going on with the client visually, energetically. Like, this is when we're talking about the nuances, right? Like, I'm really tuning in to get a
Are you
sense of,
holding that wand right there? Or are you moving
yeah,
it? Are they
no,
talking
no.
actively?
So I'm literally I'll just hold the wand in a
Yes.
spot,
Yep.
and then I say, just let your brain and body do whatever it wants to do.
Yes.
Get non-judgmental, get curious, get compassionate, and see where it goes. And sometimes they talk,
Yeah.
sometimes they don't. If they're having an
Uh-huh.
experience that maybe is pre-verbal, maybe, maybe they don't talk, for example. I do brain spotting a lot as a client, and I tend to just talk. I'm a very much a verbal processor. And so I just talk the whole time and it works for me. But sometimes I don't, right? Sometimes the brain just does what it does. Yeah. And so I, as a therapist, from the outside, it would look like I'm not doing much at all.
Mhm.
You know, I'm holding, and somebody said, "What do I just hold the stick?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you just hold the stick." Now, of course, there's more to that, but like
Yeah.
physically, that's all you do. Yeah.
Well, the good news is we know that the brain knows how to heal,
Yes.
and brain holds the trauma, the body holds the trauma, and there's in
Yep.
our neural network, our trauma gets stuck. Our trauma is outside the realm, our experience is outside the realm of normal experience that our brain cannot process on its own. But when we can activate it and we can access it the way you're talking about, once
Mhm.
activated, the brain knows how to take it from there. And so
Exactly.
you're talking about identifying it, spot it, activate it, and let the natural process take place. And it's a beautiful. I do a lot of EMDR. And it's a beautiful
Mm.
process, and
Wonderful.
it works. It's fantastic and helps us get through those things that insight therapy alone can't do. This is at a primary conscious level that we can't access with talk therapy. It's a talk therapy secondary conscious. And it's
Yep.
all good. We can identify it and we come up with coping strategies and all those things and ways to identify it early and manage it. But why not get rid of it? Why not just
Exactly.
have it not be there?
Oh my gosh, sometimes people come to me and they want tools, right? They want tools to manage. And I heard an EMDR therapist say, like, well, yeah, I just tell them, well, forget the tools. Why don't we just resolve the issue, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
go below the surface and really get into the where it started. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I'm like, I'm not really not interested in tools. They're important. They are important in the moment. But generally speaking, I'm like, yeah, let's just get down to it.
There's a great poem called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk. And it talks about walking down the street, and it's a short 5-verse a poem, and it's I'm walking down the street, and there's a hole in my sidewalk, I don't see it, and I fall in, and I have no idea what I'm in. I find my way out. Next day, I walk down the same street, there's a hole in my sidewalk, and I fall in again, and I still don't kinda know where I'm at, but I get out faster. Next day, I walk down the same street, I see the hole, I still fall in, but I know what I'm in, and I get out all the faster. The next day, I see the hole in my sidewalk, and I walk around it.
Hmm.
The next day, I walk down the street, same hole, same sidewalk, and I take a different street. And when you think about it, that's kind of good psychotherapy at a primary conscious level where we're talking about things. We teach people how to see the hole in their sidewalks and how to recognize them. If you do fall in, you don't stay down as long. You have the techniques and strategies to get out all the faster. But with the EMDR and the healing techniques you're talking about, we get to walk down the street and there's no more hole in my sidewalk.
Right. That's what I'm
Therefore,
saying. Why not fix the hole? Yeah.
I can walk down any street I want.
Yeah.
And because there's no more hole in my sidewalk.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love what you're doing around that. Tell me a little bit about, maybe something that comes to mind in terms of a hallmark story of someone coming in and really struggling and just really stuck or really wanting to work through some things of importance. And you were able to kind of employ the things that you do and the relationship that you can clearly easily establish with people that's interested and curious and caring. Walk us through kind of maybe what you did and what they walked out of their time with you experiencing and looking like.
Sure. I'm thinking of one person in particular, of course, no identifying information about this person. And the issue was they were having anxiety around their performance as a creative. And especially around like feedback from other people, such as, views and likes and all that stuff on social media and, just being what they would consider successful in their field. And we began doing EMDR around this issue. And interestingly, where we ended up, again, because we're being open and curious to see where the brain goes, where we ended up was actually this person needing to process through the death of their father at an early age.
Mm.
And we did a lot of processing around that. And then we did a lot of processing around this particular client's issues around anger and feeling out of control. We did a lot of processing around that. And interestingly, as we did all of this, the issue that they came in with originally was starting to get resolved. And
Mhm.
and they even noticed, they said, I had no idea when I came in that we would be talking about like my father's death. Like that, like, right? Like if you just look at it again, like on the surface, if you just look at it like how could that even be
Yeah.
related? It's like, well, we don't know until we explore and we find out and we actually go through that process and see that, this grief or these ideas about ourselves that get planted because of things that happen to us really do still affect us. We're
Yes.
older, but the neural pathways don't have a reason to change and don't get like they're not going to change. And so the things that we felt at 10, maybe we feel at 50, and that's okay because the brain actually is adaptable and does remain plastic and adaptable as we get older. It's a little harder, and I definitely do see my younger clients moving faster with some of these things. And I tell them, I'm like, you're lucky you're doing this right now.
Yes, I agree. Things aren't quite as crystallized and those deep neural
Yeah,
pathways aren't as furrowed.
yeah,
Absolutely. I would
yeah. But
agree to that.
we still can change though throughout our whole life, which I think is exciting.
The good news is, people enter therapy with understanding what they understand about what they know. And sometimes we find that, I never thought that I would go to this place. And that there's a real beauty in that. It's almost like the person that goes for
Mm,
the physical therapist and they got a sore hip and they think I have to have work done on my hip. It's not your right hip, it's your left knee that you
right.
haven't, that you hurt once upon a time. And you think, well, how's the funny bone connect to this bone? And well, it all does. And sometimes we're able to track people back to the origin of and heal that. And we find that subsequent to that, all the other areas that have been affected by it begin to fall in line and heal on their own. In addition to what you're doing in the therapy office, are there exercises that, outside of therapy that you recommend to those that are creative or maybe just even to our general listener right
Hmm.
now that you find
Mhm.
help bring awareness and understanding to things that you might recommend?
My favorite thing is if you're feeling blocked in a particular area, whatever your medium is. So let's say for me, as a singer, let's say my body, because as a singer, your body is your instrument.
Yeah.
And let's say for whatever reason, my throat's feeling weird or just things aren't coming out like I want. The best thing to do is to do a different creative modality in that moment that I'm not as good at maybe or not as skilled at or don't have as much experience or don't have and saying all that really the important part is don't have as many expectations and pressure and all the stuff that comes along with these modalities that we're familiar with. So for me, you know it would be a little stretch, but maybe I'll make a little sketch, right? Maybe I will, play a game, maybe I will just do something different with my body and my brain that doesn't have anything to do with the thing itself, and then come back kind of with that more refreshed, more frankly, like, beginner's mind approach to my more familiar
I
way
like
of
that.
working creatively. It's fun, yeah.
I really like to say it's almost kind of like in athletics where you cross train. You don't do the same thing over and over again. You cross train something else and it enhances
Mhm.
the area where you're trying to get better or you really, is your primary focus. That's a great strategy. Yeah, a really
Yeah,
great strategy.
and it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Some let's just say a word about that. People sometimes think when you go into therapy, it's going to be this big, heavy,
Right.
emotional times. And a lot of times it is, particularly at the beginning where you're carrying a lot and you're looking to offload and understand some things. And there's some real weight initially around some acute, things that get presented. But therapy is also really an enjoyable exchange where there's laughter and there's
Mhm.
playfulness and it's safe enough to have all of these things and well boundaried enough to have all of these things
Yeah.
come into play where two humans get together and talk about again this thing called life and explore it from the various perspectives that come up. So that is really great. I know we're kind of rounding the bend here coming home on the home stretch, but I'd love you to give kind of a takeaway message to maybe two folks, those that are creatives that are looking to come into therapy and what you might give in terms of a takeaway message for them to consider enhancing what they're doing in their lives through the use of therapy and maybe also some therapists that might think about working with this population. Say a word to both of those.
Mhm. You bet. For creative people who are considering coming into therapy, I would say, take your own creativity, your own ideas around art and creativity. They are important and they do matter. And, if you're with a therapist who understands that, even if they don't consider themselves to be an artist themselves, or necessarily work with creative people, if they can understand and be open and realize that for you, this is something that's really important and respect that, that's great. If you're with a therapist who doesn't get it or doesn't want to get it, and I hate to say because I always hope that that won't happen, but If it does, and you're feeling, disrespected or disregarded in any way around your creativity, and that's something that's really important to you, like, it's okay to, maybe find somebody
Sure.
else or let them
Shop
know
around.
or yeah, exactly. And you deserve to be respected for the things that are important to you. And that's true for anybody across the board, and especially true for people who are creative who may be a little more sensitive, around these types of things. So like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay. For therapists who want to work with creative people, I say, like, yes, please do. Where are you? We need more of us. That's part of the reason why I started my podcast, Beyond Artist Block, was like to build a community of people who work with creative people. And I have to say, I've done 30 or 40 interviews now. Everybody I've talked to who works with creative people, they're so cool. Like, they're just
Yes,
like
they
the
are.
coolest, neatest, like, people that I've encountered, and I love them. And let's have more of you, like, get into this field, because I think that, artists deserve to have great mental health and to be taken care of. And yeah, so let's keep doing it.
That's really good. Appreciate the message as a takeaway. We would love to have our listeners follow up after the show to learn more about you and to connect with all the things that you are doing. Give us the best ways to connect with you.
Sure. So my website is rachelmoorecounseling.com. And on there, I have an option for setting up a time to have a 15-minute free consultation with me. And so you can go on there. My practice is pretty full. And if it is full, and if for some other reason, I'm not able to help you as a therapist, I'm happy to give you referrals. And I find, for me, that's a service as a therapist, for me personally, that I think is really important. It's
Yes.
really hard to find a therapist. And I like being able to help people do that. And I know a lot of folks who are great, and I can refer you to. So yeah, you can find me there. You can find my podcast at beyondartistblock.com or any podcatcher. And I don't know, go to a San Diego Master Chorale
There
concert
you
and
go.
see me
Come hear
sing. I
you.
don't know, do whatever you like. Yeah. So yeah.
That's good. You guys have any summer concerts coming up or winding down or?
This will be my first year, and they're starting up in the fall. I can't remember specifically
Nice.
what they're doing, but of course we'll be doing the Messiah in December. That'll be fun,
Fantastic.
and yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up.
Well, that's a good piece to sing. Handel's Messiah. That's quite the enthusiastic song. It's a
It
beautiful,
is
beautiful
very
piece of music.
very affirming. Yeah.
Very, yes, it is. Well, Rachel, it's sure been nice to meet you today, have you on the show, and thanks for sharing all that you're doing with us.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here, and it was great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well. Also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Rachel and me today. It's always great to have you with us as well. Regarding our episode today, I want to remind you that it and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for joining us on the show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Tribe Network, all rights reserved.